Hmm. Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Gale Darkness video, where today I'm going to be completing the game with Beedrill. Now, I did Butterfree a very long time ago, so I think it's about time I get to Beedrill, its Gen 1 counterpart. However, I do think that Beedrill is going to do a lot worse, and I think that mostly comes down to Pokemon XD in particular, simply because some of its best moves are inaccessible. And it also has one other problem, but we'll get to that in just a moment. First, we need to go over its base stats. It has 65 HP, 80 attack, 40 defense, 45 special attack, 80 special defense, and 75 speed, making it a pretty fast physical attacker with actually a decent special defense stat. But the biggest issue is that it only starts with Fury Attack at level 10, a 15 base power, 85% accurate move that hits anywhere from 2 to 5 times. The problem is that it is very luck dependent whether or not you get a good roll. Luckily, you do get focus energy at level 15, meaning that I can start dealing at least decent damage with crits. However, it is a very lucky strategy all around, and it's not until level 20 that you actually get a stab option in Twin Needle, a 25 base power move that hits twice and has a 30% chance to poison, which is fairly decent, but for how weak the base power is, you do rely on the ability it has Swarm to actually raise it just by a bit. Anyway, going over to the TM side of things, it gets Giga Drain. However, actually getting that TM I think is random at the Real Gam Coliseum. It gets Brick Break, which could be a reliable physical fighting type move. And finally, if I end up having to go that far into Mount Battle, Aerial Ace is at least a decent move as well. The problem with all of this, though, is that there is a Shadow Beedrill in the game that has potentially the best moveset you can have for Beedrill, getting Sludge Bomb, Twin Needle, and Swords Dance to raise its damage, whereas it couldn't normally do that, and Sludge Bomb is its best move that unfortunately you cannot obtain in this game by TM, and it unfortunately doesn't get it by level up either. The one big caveat, though, to actually using this Shadow Beedrill is that it's only level 30, meaning that when I purify it, I'm going to have to do a lot of training to actually get it to a decent level to continue the game, because you don't actually obtain this until well into the late game, which is just very unfortunate. But anyway, let's go ahead and move on to our Beedrill in particular, which has a serious nature, which is a neutral nature, but that's honestly fine. It gets access to the Swarm ability, raising bug type damage whenever it's below a third of its max HP, and of course it only gets Fury Attack by level 10. Now, one thing you might be asking is why not use the moves from Caterpie and Kakuna, and I'm following the same guidelines as I did for the Butterfree video, where it only had Confusion starting off. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to our first battle against the Old Man. And honestly, as you might expect from a Pokemon with actually fairly decent stats, it didn't really struggle too much in the early game. And of course, its only real issue at this point is the inconsistency with Fury Attack and hitting a decent amount of times or hitting at all. But it has been fairly good to me at this point. So I'm able to slowly chip away at the Old Man's Pokemon, and while things are going a bit slow, hopefully once I get Focus Energy at level 15, I'll be able to get through these battles a lot quicker with my higher crit chance. But anyway, with the Old Man nearly defeated, we now get to level 15, where I finally get Focus Energy, and we go on to the Power Rangers, where today I decide to fight Green, because I'm 4 times resistant to their grass type moves, and Green has the lowest level Pokemon, which should allow me to get through this battle a bit easier. Anyway, with that, let's go ahead and commence a little bit of rambling. If you are enjoying this video so far, consider liking, and if you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Now, I've wanted to do Beedrill for a very long time. However, when this channel transitioned from solo Pokemon to duos more frequently, Beedrill unfortunately got left on the wayside. So I'm glad Beedrill finally gets its time to shine. And currently I have a schedule set up of more or less a solo video followed by a duo video and then a team video. And while I do think this does allow every aspect of the game to be shown, I just want to ask the question again, because it has been a very long time. Do you prefer the solo or duo videos? The team videos are obviously going to keep coming because I do enjoy making those a lot. They just take a lot longer to do. Anyway, as always, thanks for the feedback, but we beat Green, and at level 20, Beedrill gets the move Twin Needle. And then soon after, at level 25, Beedrill gets Rage, which I'm not really going to use. And then we go into the battle against Naps. The reason I'm showing this off is because his Pokemon are specifically really good against Beedrill. Murkrow, of course, has Peck, and unfortunately, even with a full 5 Fury attack, it doesn't go down. So this battle did require me to do a bit of extra grinding to make sure Murkrow actually goes down to a single set of Twin Needles, which after the first attempt I did realize I should have used Twin Needle, but makes no difference either way. I wasn't strong enough at that point to take it down anyway. Rhyhorn, of course, doesn't go down very easily to Twin Needle either. A poison would have made it a 2-shot though. And then out comes Beldum, who does go down to a single set of Twin Needles. However, I do think that was just because I got a crit on one of them. But eventually we make it past, and we move on to Laverina, the first boss of the game. She leads with the Love Disc and a Beedrill, and I missed the very first Fury attack, which is just very unfortunate. Go for Twin Needle into Beautifly, not really dealing that much damage. And another Gust takes me down to 22. Go for another Twin Needle, getting a crit, taking it down. Okay, well I'm down to 25 HP, so this is looking very unlikely. And that Love Disc is doing 5 every time. Roselia goes down in a single hit. And then out comes her final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Delcatty. And I go for Twin Needle, which gets a crit and takes it down in a single hit as well. So surprisingly, we beat this on the first attempt. So, of course, you can't have a Pokemon XD Gale Darkness video without the obligatory Mirror B. Anyway, Mirror B, how was your day? Well, it's always good to check in on you. Anyway, at level 30, Beedrill gets Pursuit, which I'm going to teach over Rage. And then I go into a battle against a random trainer, which gives Beedrill a particularly hard time. And unfortunately, I didn't write down how many attempts it actually took. But the Beautifly unfortunately resists my best move and has Gust. The Spinarak has Nightshade and can lower my speed. And then there's the Dustox, which has both Confusion and Gust. And then she sends out a Shadow Vulpix, which of course has a Shadow Wave. And because my special defense is fairly decent, it's actually not all that threatening. It's mostly the other Pokemon that are an issue. And of course all these battles are overcome by just doing a little bit of extra training. However, that does take a bit of time. Anyway, at the Railgun Tower, I pick up my 2 favorite TMs, Hidden Power and Protect, and I'm going to teach Hidden Power right away. And this Beedrill gets Hidden Power Rock, which is quite possibly the best Hidden Power type it could have gotten because it does very well against the final boss, and it's even 52 base power, which is very solid. Anyway, we go into the battle against Natalie, leads with a Quagsire and a Lantern, and I'm already down to 18 HP, so as you might expect, I go down very quickly. However, I do see that I'm dealing decent damage to the Quagsire, not enough to take it down in a single turn, but certainly fine, and I get to see a Shadow Lunatone. Anyway, let's go in there to actually get our first attempt, and Quagsire gets poisoned, and Twin Needle is doing half to it. Unfortunately, I get my speed lowered by Rock Tomb, but I am able to finish it off and still outspeed the Lantern, which is very nice. And now to see how much Twin Needle does to Lunatone. Luckily it is a one-shot, then he sends out Cast Form, and because the Shadow Sky isn't up, I'm not really in that much danger. Twin Needle unfortunately doesn't take down Cast Form in a single hit though. Go for another one to finish it off, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, which is a Metang, and I am getting fairly low on health. Twin Needle does take it down fairly low, but unfortunately Confusion does finish me off. So I do a little bit of extra training, get up to level 45 where I get the move Endeavor, which I'm going to teach over Fury Attack, and then I'm going to go into the battle once again at level 47. Twin Needle is still doing about the same damage to Quagsire, but luckily I do avoid a Rock Tomb this time. Quagsire goes down, then out comes Lunatone once again, and I already know I take it down in a single hit, so it's not a threat whatsoever. And in fact, I didn't even need the second Needle. Out comes Cast Form, and judging by the damage I did to Quagsire, it's still not a one-shot on Cast Form. But I am taking attacks much better, only being at 70 HP by the time the Metang comes out. Another Shockwave takes me down to below half. Twin Needle takes Metang down to below half, it hits a Confusion, nearly taking me down to red, but Metang goes down, and then all that's left is the Lantern. And because I really just want to use Endeavor, I decide to go for it, take it down to 23 HP, and then finish it off with a Twin Needle. Now with that, we go ahead and move right along to Gonzat because there's nothing that really happens in between. He leads with a Nuzleaf and an Electrode, And luckily the Electrode is just going for Sonic Boom, so I know it's not a threat in the future attempts I'll have. However, it still might be a good idea to teach Protect at this point anyway, just so I don't get hit by Fake Out on the first turn. So I go back in there again for an actual attempt. And I go for Protect on the first turn, then I go for Twin Needle, taking Electrode down to low red. Nuzleaf goes for Hyper Beam, not really doing that much damage either. And I decide to just go ahead and take down the Electrode because it does outspeed me. He then sends out Vileplume, and I go for Protect just to heal up some before I start attacking. Twin Needle is dealing decent damage to the Vileplume, but it goes for Sleep Powder, which is very unfortunate that it hit. So now I have to go for Call on the following turn in order to wake up again, which then allows Nuzleaf to attack again, so I'm going to go for Protect one more time and finish off the Vileplume, and then out comes Whiscash, which is quite a tanky Pokemon, so I don't think I'm going to be able to take it down in a single turn. And I go for Twin Needle, which does do half to it. Nuzleaf decides to actually switch over to Aerial Ace, which is definitely much worse for me because now there's no recharge turn, so I'm going to take it down now. And then that sends out his final Pokemon, which is Skarmory. I go for Protect, but at this point I think it's basically over. Go for Twin Needle to take down the Whiscash. And then an Aerial Ace takes me down to 18. I heal up to 26. I decide to go for a Protect, bringing me up to 34. Maybe I can survive an Aerial Ace. Unfortunately, I can't, and I go down. So after defeating all the trainers in the Snag'em base, I come back for my 4th attempt at level 55, where I still don't quite take down Electrode in a single hit. So I do need to use Hidden Power to finish it off, though had I gotten the Poison chance, I could have taken it down in a single turn. Then out comes Vileplume once again, go for Twin Needle. Also don't take it down in a single turn either, it hits a Sleep Powder just like before. So I will need to spend the next turn waking up. And then I'm going to Protect on the following turn in order to heal up a bit. And then I can finally start attacking. I go for Twin Needle, taking down Vileplume, then out comes the Whiscash. Nuzleaf goes for Hyper Beam, dealing almost no damage. Twin Needle, not enough to take down the Whiscash, though it is poisoned now. But it's also going for Rock Tomb now, which is a bit worse. The Nuzleaf decides to swap over to Aerial Ace once again, and then out comes Skarmory. Rock Tomb, lowering my speed even further. Hopefully I'm not slower than the Skarmory. Go for Protect, and then I go for Hidden Power Rock, which is neutral, but really not doing that much damage. And at this point I should win the War of Attrition. However, if Skarmory does get a crit, I will lose this battle once again. But luckily it does not happen, and we're able to beat Gonzep and move on to finally the other Shadow Beedrill. Now notice my level is 57 at this point, so I am quite a bit higher than this Beedrill at level 30. However, depending on how this Beedrill looks, I might be inclined to switch over to it. Simply because even though my Beedrill could probably beat the final boss, I'm not sure if it'll be able to get past the trainers leading up to it without absurdly high levels. But regardless, I was going to catch this Beedrill anyway, just to check to see if it would be a better fit than our current one. And unfortunately, it doesn't go into the Luxury Ball, so I'm going to have to go with the standard Ultra Ball, which it also doesn't like, but it fits the color scheme, so I'm going to go for another, and finally catch it on the 3rd attempt. So with that, we purify the Beedrill, and it's finally time to see whether or not this Beedrill could cut it. So starting off very strong, it has a Brave nature, raising its attack but lowering its speed. So definitely not the greatest nature it could have had, however the extra attack could be nice. The speed, however, is a bit of a letdown to be lost. It does have Sludge Bomb, Baton Pass, Twin Needle, and Swords Dance though, so I do think that it's worthwhile changing over to it. I decide to teach Hidden Power, and I get to the long, arduous training of getting Beedrill up to at least a decent level. So we get to the top of the pyramid, and our Beedrill is now at level 49, and I decide to teach it Protect over Hidden Power, and then I go into the battle against Gorgon. He leads with Alaron and a Celio, and on the first turn, because Celio is just going to go for a fairly weak Earthquake, I decide to go for Swords Dance, then Protect on the following turn, then do Swords Dance once again, and I'll keep doing this until I get to +6. That way I know I'm guaranteed to KO just about every single one of his Pokemon in a single hit, other than probably the Laron, seeing as I don't have super effective damage. So anyway, now that I'm up to +6, I go for one last Protect, and I can finally start the offensive. I go for Sludge Bomb into the Celio, taking it down in a single hit, and then out comes Slowking, and I go for another Sword Stance, which is just an unfortunate bit of muscle memory. I always have Protect in the bottom right, so I went for the bottom right as I normally would. Anyway, I go for Twin Needle to take down the Slowking in a single hit, and I forgot to heal up my Protect PP, so unfortunately I am going to have to just go and not slow down. I go for a Sludge Bomb, taking down the Earth Ring. I go for another Sludge Bomb, taking down the Primeape, and then out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Hypno. And luckily Lairon is just missing these Iron Tails, and I go for Twin Needle, taking down the Hypno, and then all that's left is the Lairon. Twin Needle does take it down below half, and one more finishes it off. So with Gorgon defeated, we can now move on to the last area of the game, where I think Beedrill is definitely going to suffer, but we'll just have to see how well it does. And of course, its first challenge is against Lavrina. She leads with a Gardevoir and a Gorbis, and I go for Sludge Bomb into Gorbis, which doesn't take it down in a single hit. Had it gotten poisoned though, I think it might have. I get attracted, and I go for Sludge Bomb, finishing it off. Then out comes Roselia. Gardevoir goes for Psychic, taking me down to 25 HP. I go for Protect to heal up a bit, and then I go for Twin Needle to take it down, which it does in a single hit. Then out comes Farfetch'd. And between the two of these, I definitely need to get rid of the Farfetch'd. However, that Leech Seed is going to be quite annoying. But Farfetch'd goes down. Out comes Altaria. And unfortunately, because of the Leech Seed that's up, I am going to need to take down the Roselia this turn, which will result in my first loss against Lavrina. Though not too bad for a first attempt. However, I did need to do a little bit of extra training. That way I can guarantee the Gorbis goes down in a single turn. That way it doesn't attract me and cause more problems down the line. I go for Protect after the Gardevoir attacks, and then I go for Twin Needle to finish it off just as before. Then out comes the Farfetch'd, and at this point I am at a much higher HP, so the Leech Seed isn't going to matter nearly as much. Sludge Bomb takes down the Farfetch'd just as before, and then out comes her last Pokemon, a Shadow Altaria. Roselia hits me with a very weak Pin Missile, and I finish it off with a Sludge Bomb, and then all that's left is that Altaria, which Shadow Break does deal decent damage, so I am going to go for Protect, but I think just 2 Sludge Bombs should do the job. Actually, that was much closer than I thought it would be. Anyway, I survive on 10 HP and finish it off the following turn. So 3 attempts, not too bad. At the top of the volcano, I run into Snaddle, and he leads with a Metang and Quagsire. I go for Sword Stance on the first turn. Metang goes for Psychic, not dealing that much damage, and Quagsire goes for Mud Shot, lowering my speed. I go for Sludge Bomb now to take down the Quagsire. Hopefully in a single hit, it does, despite being resisted. Then out comes Scizor. And unfortunately, I don't have a great move to take down Scizor, so I go for Protect. And it's going for Aerial Ace. Go for Twin Needle, dealing over half. Okay, well that's good. Unfortunately, I do take quite a bit of damage. I go for Protect to heal up a bit. And then on the following turn, I finish off the Scizor with Twin Needle. And that brings out his first Shadow Pokemon, which is Solrock. And it's going to go for Shadow Sky, which usually might not be an issue for Beedrill. However, because my speed is lowered, I know that the final Pokemon is going to be an issue. But anyway, with Solrock down, out comes Castform, and it's going for Flamethrower. So now I have to decide whether or not I want to get rid of Metang or Castform. I decide to get rid of Metang at this point, simply because it is a Psychic type using a Psychic move, so it should be dealing more damage than the Castform with Flamethrower. And actually that's looking pretty close. But it doesn't really matter because Starmie outspeeds and takes me out with Shadow Storm. So after that loss, I decide to go over to the Pyrite Coliseum to get the one and only Brick Break TM, which I'm going to teach over Twin Needle, and then I go back into the battle once again. I go for Sword Stance on the first turn, just as before, but crucially, Quagsire doesn't actually decide to go for Mud Shot, instead opting for Body Slam. So I don't have my speed lowered. I go for Brick Break, taking it down, and then out comes Scizor, which Brick Break should hopefully take down in a single hit as well, but not before I Protect just to heal up some. And I go for it, taking it down in a single hit. Okay, that's great. And then out comes Solrock. And at this point, because Solrock is just going to go for Shadow Sky, and I should outspeed the Starmie, I decide to take down the Metang at this point, which then brings out the Castform. It sets up Shadow Sky. And because I know that Castform is just going for Flamethrower, as long as it doesn't burn, it's not actually a threat, so I take down the Solrock, bringing out his final Pokemon, the Shadow Starmie once again. And I know that I'm faster now, so I go for Sludge Bomb, taking it down in a single hit. And then that just leaves the Castform, which goes down to just about everything I have. So I decided to go for Brick Break and finish it off. So with that, Snaddle is defeated, and we move on to Ardos. He leads with an Alakazam and Shadow Swallow, and unfortunately I'm slower than the Swallow, but faster than the Alakazam, so that's good. Kazam goes down, then out comes Kingdra. Fruity Pebbles rain down, and I go for Protect on this turn, hoping that Swallow goes for Shadow Half, but instead it goes for Shadow Break, which is a bit unfortunate. I go for Sledge Bomb into the Kingdra, and unfortunately this turn Swallow decides to go for Shadow Half. I am able to take down the Kingdra though, then out comes Heracross. Unfortunately I don't really have anything to deal great damage to the Heracross, so I decided to go for Swords Dance here. Hopefully I can just get a lot more damage to take it down. And then I go for another Protect to stall off the Fruity Pebbles. And hopefully Swallow decides to go for Shadow Sky again, which it does. Go for Sledge Bomb, taking down the Heracross, then out comes Electabuzz. Now I did get Rock Tomb, so there's a very good chance that I am slower than it. And to make matters worse is if Swallow doesn't decide to go for Shadow Half here, I am going to take a big amount of damage from Shadow Break. In fact, enough to take me down. But I do think with a bit more luck, I can definitely do this on the second attempt to go for Sledge Bomb just as before to take down the Alakazam right away, then out comes Kingdra. And hopefully the Swallow decides to go for Shadow Half this turn, which it does, cutting the HP of everything but myself because I protected. And because I know I'm going to need the extra damage for the final Pokemon, I decide to go set up a Swords Dance now. Even though it is a bit risky leaving the Swallow unattended like that, I go for Protect once again, and luckily it decides to go for Shadow Half again, which is fantastic. Fruity Pebbles rain down, nearly taking down the Kingdra by itself, so I decide to take down the Swallow this turn, then out comes the Heracross once again. Kingdra goes for Double Edge, taking itself down, which then brings out the Electabuzz. And now I'm in an interesting position where I think I might be able to outspeed the Electabuzz and take it down, or I could play it safe and take down the Heracross, leaving it with the Snorlax. That way it's going to just be going for Shadow Mist. However, Electabuzz plays its own game, which I'm completely fine with. It decides to go for Shadow Half, which then allows me to take down the Snorlax in a single turn, and because I know I'm faster than the Electabuzz, despite the fact that I went for Protect here, I take it down with Sludge Bomb and beat Ardos. So with that, we move on to Gorgon. He leads with a Slowking and an Ursaring this time. And just like the previous encounter with Gorgon, I am going to, of course, set up +6 attack. That way I know I'm guaranteed to take down everything in a single hit without having to worry about any issues. However, going this safe does waste a bit of time, which is why I went ahead and sped up that first bit of the battle. Anyway, now at +6, I go for Sludge Bomb, taking down Slowking in a single hit. Then I go for Brick Break, taking out Aggron. Then out comes Walrein. Ursaring hits a slash, not dealing that much damage. Go for Sludge Bomb into the Walrein, which in hindsight I think Brick Break might actually do more, but doesn't really matter. Out comes the Poliwrath. Sludge Bomb takes it down. Then out comes his final Pokemon, a Shadow Mr. Mime, and Ursaring hits another slash. Luckily it's not getting any crits. Sludge Bomb takes down the Mr. Mime, and all that's left is the Ursaring, which goes down to a single Brick Break. Moving on to Eldis, he leads with a Manectric and a Ninjask, and usually the Manectric goes for Shadow Sky on the first turn, so I decided to play it a little risky and go for Swords Dance. And while I'm not sure if Manectric was a one-shot, this is a great way to guarantee that it goes down. But the real reason I went for Swords Dance on the first turn is because of the Shadow Salamence, with the Intimidate ability lowering my attack by 1 stage. And so I'm only +1 attack, but that is still very strong. Go for Sludge Bomb, taking Salamence down in a single hit, then out comes Flygon. It is part ground, so it's not going to be taking a ton of damage from my Sludge Bomb. However, before I start attacking, Ninjask is on a set cycle of attack and defend, so I am going to try to work a counter to it. That way I'm constantly protecting when it wants to attack. So Brick Break takes down the Flygon in a single hit, then out comes the Shadow Marowak, which of course is always very scary, but with the Shadow Sky gone, it's not going to be dealing nearly as much damage with Shadow End. And regardless, I'm at +1, so Brick Break should take it down. It doesn't, and it gets a crit and takes me down in a single hit. Okay, well that is just very unfortunate. Going back into the battle again for a second attempt, and I decided to skip ahead because the whole beginning is exactly the same. And I decided to go until I get to the Flygon because I set up the second Swords Dance here before taking down the Flygon. And then going after the Marowak. Now at +3, I 100% take down this Marowak. So I go for Brick Break, of course taking it down, and then out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Lapras, and with Brick Break I absolutely take it down as well. But before that, I decided to take down the Ninjask because it is just a little bit annoying. And Brick Break finishes the job, and we beat Eldest on the second attempt. So now moving on to the big box legendary, Shovelwolgia, and I go for Sludge Bomb, nearly dealing half. Okay, it does a decent chunk to me though. Go for Protect to heal up a bit, and then another Sludge Bomb to take it down to low red, and it gets poisoned. Hopefully that's enough to take it down. It is, and we move on to the final battle against Beedrill. He leads with a Shadow Rhydon and Moltres, and I go for Sludge Bomb, dealing great damage to the Moltres, nearly taking it down in a single hit, but Rhydon hits the Shadow and finishes me off. Okay, well that's alright. The second attempt for a real first attempt, and I go for Swords Dance on the first turn because I think I can get away with it. Unfortunately, Rhydon hits the Shadow End, taking me down to 24. I go for Protect, and then I go for Sludge Bomb to take down the Moltres, which it does, of course, and then out comes Executor. And as long as Rhydon doesn't hit, which it does, and defeats the second attempt, okay, well that's alright. Third attempt. Okay, go for Brick Break, and that's not enough to take down Rhydon in a single hit. And it hits a Shadow End, taking me down to 27. And unfortunately this time I don't even have a Swords Dance set up, so I'm not able to take down the Moltres. So before I go down, I decide to take down Rhydon for the extra experience, and Shadow Fire finishes me off. Okay, well, I decide to teach Hidden Power again, which I forgot to mention is actually Hidden Power Rock again, which is incredibly nice. Unfortunately, it is only 37 base power. However, 4 times effective against the legendary birds, though if I can do math correctly, that should be effectively 148 base power against them. Unfortunately, still not enough to take down Moltres in a single hit, though if I use my rare candies, I should be able to do it. Luckily, Rhydon is working with us fairly well here though, it's not attacking. I take down the Moltres, and then out comes Executor, which I do have super effective damage for, so it's not really a threat either. But just to be safe, I go for Protect to heal up some, and Sludge Bomb takes it down. And then out comes Tauros, which also has the Intimidate ability, which is going to lower my attack by 1, so I am still +1, but it might not be enough to take it down. It is though. So that's great to know on any future attempts. Out comes Articuno, and I go for Protect to get to nearly full HP, and then I go for Hidden Power into it, taking it down in a single hit, so it's good to know that +1 is probably enough to take it down as well. Then out comes Zapdos. This is the only legendary bird that isn't going to be taking 4 times effective damage, so I decide to switch over to Sludge Bomb, which does take it down in a single hit, and Rhydon finally hits its first Shadow End, which honestly I'm surprised it took so long. Because I don't really have anything to deal decent damage to it though, I decide to go for Sludge Bomb, and I do get the lucky poison, so I'm able to whittle it down and finally take down Beedrill. Now here's the thing, that was a very lucky final battle, but I do think that had I just used my rare candies, I would have been able to survive the attacks a little bit better, as well as get better ranges on KOing Pokemon in a single hit. So I think overall it's fine. Plus, it's a 60% accurate move, so Beedrill is really always taking a risk whenever he's going for Shadow End, which isn't really my fault, that's just how the game is. With that being said, how well did Beedrill do? Well, it beat the game at a time of 15 hours, 43 minutes, and 54 seconds at level 76-77, and then it had 43 faints, 16 of those to bosses, and 27 of those to random trainers. So with that, it finds itself right below the baby Pokemon. Now, the thing is that while I do think that Beedrill didn't do all that great throughout the game, it does still find itself in the same tier as Butterfree, though quite a bit slower. However, that is still a testament to how strong Swords Dance is, and how it can make a Pokemon that is not the greatest be incredibly powerful. Though Beedrill was already fairly good on its own, but I think Swords Dance definitely pushes it above and beyond, despite it being still in the C tier. Now, Beedrill is a fairly solid Pokemon, and I think with proper team support it could actually succeed. So anyway, I think Beedrill did quite well, better than I anticipated, and finds itself in the C tier. So if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye!